This video is intended to support what we're going to be covering in class this week. We're going to be making a ring for the first time and soldering a joint. I'm going to be using sterling silver sheet that's 2mm thick. That's nice and strong. It will hold its form for many years to come. And the sheet I'm using is 5mm wide. If you have a ring sizer, use one. We've always got one in class. If not, a sheet of paper wrapped around your finger will do, but not quite as accurate. I've got two ring sizes, one for thin gauge metal and other for thicker metal. The wider the ring you're making, the larger it will have to be because it has to pass over the knuckle. So I've put the size I've chosen onto the mandrel and I'm going to mark either side with a felt pen, which will easily rub off when we're finished. Now take some paper. You can use the calculation if you want. I'm going to show you the old-fashioned way. I'm just cutting the paper down to as close as I can to the width of the metal. Now I'm wrapping it round on the mark I've made and I'm going to mark it with a felt pen. Then unwrap it and measure it. So that's measuring 60mm. Now remember to add the thickness of your metal onto that measurement. Thickness today is 2mm. I add 1 for error, but you're very new to this, so add at least 2, I would say, to it. Remember how much you've added though, can always be filed away. So straighten out your metal, get it as flat as possible, and check you're working from a straight edge. Make sure your saw blade is good and tight. Remember you're cutting on the downward stroke normally, but it makes life easier if you just do a little upward stroke first, just to create a small groove. Then bring your saw perpendicular and use the whole blade. Use a little bit of beeswax if your blade is sticking in the metal, and you should get through it in no time at all. At this point it's worth checking that you have cut the right amount. Now file it. File carefully, keep stopping and looking. Check that you're actually making it straighter rather than more wonky. And when we've finished this process, I'm going to show you the setup for annealing again. Because our work will now be work hardened because of the cutting and the filing, so we need to soften it before we form it. I've got a soldering block, I've got water, and I've got insulated tweezers to pick the metal up once it's hot. The metal appears red already. This is because I have bright red units in the workroom, and this is reflecting light off the silver. So I've got a very bushy reducing flame, more about that in class. Your torches might not have it on. Keep the flame moving. If you could watch the distance out away I am from the metal as well, please. And you should start to see a dull glow of a purpley red colour that we associate with annealing, which of course is 650 degrees. Rather difficult because my metal looks red already, but you can just start to see it glowing from inside now, that dull purpley colour. So torch off immediately, check it is out, place it away from other students so they don't burn themselves. Insulated tweezers, and you should get a good hiss as it hits the cold water. And then remember, swap onto either copper or brass tweezers for the pickle. So now it's been pickled. You can use a variety of hammers for forming your ring. I was taught with a metal hammer, it's one I use all the time, but if you could just see how highly polished the face is, always check the face of a hammer before you pick it up and hit your silver with it. The hammer is much harder and will transfer a mark onto your silver. So because the metal's lovely and soft, I can just physically pull this around with my fingers to get it started. You have different bench pegs from me in class, and they're very handy for wedging the metal underneath and just to give you an extra pair of hands, so to speak. So try and hit the face of the hammer directly onto the metal so you don't put any marks in it. This should not mark your metal if you do it correctly. Try to hit the metal relatively close to the mandrel, and in that way you won't create kinks, you'll get a nice curve. It's still soft enough for me to just help it round with my fingers, and I'm starting just to feel the beginnings of work hardening. So at this point I'm going to stop and I'm going to anneal again. I'm paying particular attention to the ends of the metal because this is where I want to really get them shaped around the mandrel. You can see the dull purple red glow there. Just hold that for a second or two. Torch off, check it's off, place it where people can't hurt themselves. It's been annealed, it's been washed and dried, and now it's back on the mandrel. And it's coming together very nicely there. Do you remember I described the V-shaped gap? This shows it. Now this is because the inside edge of the metal comes together before the outer edges do. And this is why we added the thickness of the metal. So I'm going to take a saw blade down the V, and I'm going to do it repeatedly. As the metal becomes more and more work hardened, it will spring closely together, so you probably won't need to anneal it, but sometimes you do. This shows a rather strange angle on the camera. My fingers are actually well out of the way. Do be careful because it is so easy for the saw blade to suddenly pop out the metal and go into your finger. Right, so there we are. So I've got it back together again, and I'm cutting away again. Each time I do this, the bottom of the V will be removed, and gradually the metal will come together. You can see there it's starting to get better. So I've pushed the edges together again, just with finger pressure, and once more I am cutting. You can definitely see a big improvement that time. So I'm going to keep on doing this. You must get your edges banged together so that there is no gap at all, or you'll get a weak and ugly joint. I think this time might be the one, and it will just snap beautifully together. You can tell I'm nearly there because it's taking much longer to get through. I'm having to cut through more of the depth of metal this time. Patience is a virtue with silversmithing. Now you can see the edges are perfectly together. That joint should hold well. So we're going to solder. So I've got water, I've got insulated tweezers, I've got flux. This is easy flow flux mixed with water. You'll be using borax cone, but single to double cream consistency is the thing to aim for. And then we're going to be using hard solder. The solder comes in thick pallions there, and we roll it down. We're using hard solder, which melts at 775 degrees centigrade. This means that we can then solder other things onto it with medium and easy solder. And we have extra easy solder, which is the lowest melting point in case we need it. Torch positioning. Do not please hold your torch when it's lit like this. The heat will come back up and damage the torch. Keep it at an angle to it. That will drastically shorten the life of your torch. So here's our ring, and I'm painting it with flux with a clean brush. I'm trying to work it into the joint. The flux, remember, allows the solder to run and key onto the metal. So I've cut a tiny piece of the hard solder. You can put it underneath, on top, or try and balance it on the side. When you're beginning, put it underneath because it doesn't fly away. You have to have perfect contact between the silver and the solder. Can you see there? It's just sitting perfectly on the top. So the flame. Now I'm using a pencil flame. This is a hotter flame. Again, I'll explain more about this in class. I do apologise, this is going out of focus temporarily. It's difficult doing this on your own. You see the flux bubbling up. It's doing its work. Don't be concerned about this at all. And I'm heating the whole of the ring. We need everything to be at roughly the same temperature for the solder to run. So now I'm happy, things are above annealing temperature. I'm going to focus on the area of the ring where the solder lies and just be patient, keep warming the back a little bit, but generally my focus is that. If you notice, my angle of torch has changed, so it's more level with the joint I'm trying to solder now. You can see a big difference in the temperature here compared to when we were annealing. I'm starting to get a real cherry bright red and tinges of orange. Patience. If you think you're getting too hot, if you see it really get quite bright yellow, bright orange, bright yellow, stop immediately. Just turn your torch off. We'll clean it up and go again. There, the solder ran. Did you see it? Try and show you again. There. So now turn your torch off, make sure it's off. Put it where other students can't burn themselves on it. This is one I've set up to show you solder running from the top. I've slightly melted the solder on prior to this just to tack it in place, just so it doesn't fly away. But it just gives you another chance to watch solder run, hopefully, if we can. And you can see my torch now is in a line with the solder. Remember, solder should run with gravity and towards the torch. I don't know if anyone's ever told the solder that, because some days it seems to do exactly what it pleases, but that's the theory for you. There, you see it run? So, the opposite of annealing, please. Let it cool down on the block. Do not put it straight into cold water, because you will shock the joint and it could crack open. Also, you've been at 770 degrees centigrade. If you throw it into cold water at this point, you will make your metal brittle. So this is a handy little hole in my workbench. The metal's been pickled, so it's nice and clean. And now I'm going to use a hammer again to get it round. So I'm tapping at rather a funny angle, so my hands or the hammer aren't in the way of the camera, so I hope you can see. Remember to keep turning the ring over on the ring mandrel, because the ring mandrel is conically shaped and you will end up with a very strange shaped ring if you don't swap it over from time to time. Gentle controlled taps. Now you might feel your metal start to be a bit twangy, and at this point you may need to anneal again. You'll be fine. Remember, hard solder melts at 775 degrees, and at annealing temperature you're only at 650 degrees if you control it properly, so you will not endanger the strength of your joint. The way to tell if it's right, trying to hold it so you can see, if you look down the ring, you shouldn't be able to see any gaps. So now I'm checking to see if it's level. So I've got it on a flat plate. Mine is level, but I'm just demonstrating here. Just taps. Again, you might need to anneal. Turn it over and do it again. And this is just to show you what you're aiming for. I haven't cleaned the whole thing up, but you can see there's hardly any visible solder joint there at all. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in class.